Beneath the endless white of Cedar Hollow, a police officer once found two children lost in the snow, one clutching a silver bracelet that whispered, "Find the light." What began as a rescue became a story of redemption, courage, and love, reborn through frost and fire. But not every shadow in the snow was gone. Some still waited to be faced. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments below, and let this story keep you company like a fire in winter. May your day, or your night, be filled with warmth, kindness, and light. Cedar Hollow lay buried beneath a quilt of snow that muffled every sound. The town, tucked between the whispering pines of northern Montana, was a place of long winters and longer silences. The December wind howled through the narrow streets like a ghost that couldn't rest, rattling shutters and scattering snowflakes that glowed faintly beneath the flickering street lamps. Beyond the last row of houses, a small, sagging home stood on the edge of the forest road, its roof heavy with ice. Inside, the faint light of a dying fireplace trembled against peeling wallpaper. The house belonged to Andrew Moore, a man of 42 who once wore the courage of a firefighter, but now carried only the exhaustion of a widower. His tall frame, once strong from years of service, had grown thin and uncertain. Grief had carved deep shadows under his gray-green eyes, and his brown hair, once neat, hung in uneven strands. Since his wife Amelia died in a car accident 2 winters ago, Andrew had found comfort only at the bottom of a bottle. The fire crackled weakly as he sat at the kitchen table, staring into an empty glass, lost in the endless loop of what-ifs. Across the room stood Evelyn, his second wife. She was in her early 30s, tall and striking, with auburn hair pinned neatly into a bun that never seemed to loosen. Her beauty was sharp, her posture rigid, her eyes like glass, reflecting everything, feeling nothing. Once a waitress at a diner where Andrew had found momentary solace, Evelyn had married him not out of love, but convenience. Life with her was a performance, perfectly set tableware, spotless curtains, and words as cold as the frost that crept along the window panes. She stood now with her arms crossed, tapping her manicured nails against her sleeve. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice slicing through the silence. "Those children, they don't belong here." In the doorway, 2 small figures froze. Lila, the older of the 2, was 9. She had her mother's wide hazel eyes and chestnut hair that fell unevenly to her shoulders. Her cheeks were pale, streaked with the salt of quiet tears, but her jaw, small and stubborn, trembled with a strength she didn't yet understand. Her little brother Noah, only 6, stood half hidden behind her coat, his face round, his freckles faint beneath the soot from the fireplace. He clutched a threadbare teddy bear against his chest, the toy missing one ear, its stuffing visible at the seams. The faint scent of wood smoke clung to their clothes. Lila stepped forward, her small boots scuffing the floor. "We can help, Evelyn," she said softly, almost pleading. "We can clean the dishes or sweep the porch." Evelyn's laughter, brittle and sharp, stopped her mid-sentence. "Clean?" she sneered. "You 2 are ghosts of that woman. Every time I look at you, I see her. I won't live surrounded by memories I never asked for." Andrew's head lifted slightly, his lips parted, but no words came. His eyes, dull and red-rimmed, flickered toward his children, then back to his drink. "Say something, Andrew," Evelyn snapped, slamming her hand against the counter. "They're not my children, and they're not yours anymore either, not really." Andrew exhaled, voice breaking in a whisper. "They're Amelia's children." Evelyn's eyes hardened. "Exactly." She turned toward the doorway, her figure tall and severe in the dim light. "Pack your things, both of you. I want you gone before morning." The words hit like stones. Noah began to cry quietly, his small hands trembling against Lila's sleeve. "Why does she hate us?" he whispered, voice muffled. Lila bent down, brushing his hair back with gentle fingers. "She doesn't hate you," she lied, her voice shaking. "She just doesn't understand us." She remembered how her mother used to soothe every storm with a simple touch, how her presence had made the world make sense. But now there was only the wind outside and the bitter smell of liquor. Andrew said nothing as Evelyn stormed upstairs, her heels striking the floor like the final nails in a coffin. The house fell into stillness, broken only by Noah's quiet sniffles and the low moan of the wind. Lila stared at her father, waiting for him to move, to stand, to speak, to do anything. But he only lifted the glass again, staring into it as though it might hold the courage he had long since lost. She realized then that he wasn't cruel, he was empty. Without a word, she walked to the small room she shared with Noah. The walls were cold, the bed thin. She pulled an old scarf, knitted years ago by Amelia, from a drawer and wrapped it around Noah's neck. From beneath the bed, she took a small tin box containing the few things they owned. A photograph of their mother smiling in the sun, Noah's teddy bear, and a silver bracelet engraved with the letters A and M. It had been Amelia's favorite, worn every day until the accident. Lila slipped it onto her wrist, the metal cold against her skin, and whispered, "Mom, please watch us tonight." When they stepped into the hallway, Evelyn's voice echoed faintly from upstairs, talking on the phone, her tone sharp and hurried. The children passed silently through the front door. Outside, the night swallowed them whole. Snow crunched beneath their thin shoes, the air so cold it burned their lungs. Lila looked back once. Through the frosted window, she could see her father's silhouette slumped at the table, a single lamp illuminating his bowed head. His shoulders trembled, from grief, from guilt, or from the cold, she couldn't tell. The road stretched ahead like a river of white under the moonlight. Lila held Noah's hand tightly. "Where are we going?" he asked. "I don't know," she said softly, "but Mom once told me that wherever we go, we stay together." The snow deepened, covering their footprints as soon as they were made. The wind carried the scent of pine and something else, rain perhaps, or sorrow. Hours passed. Their breath came in thin clouds. Lila's scarf was soaked, Noah's fingers blue. They reached the edge of town, where the forest loomed like a dark sea. Just beyond the trees, faint lights flickered, perhaps from a farmhouse. Lila squinted through the curtain of snow. "Look, Noah," she whispered, "there's light over there." Her voice trembled with hope, fragile but alive. Noah nodded, too tired to speak, his small hand limp in hers. They crossed the frozen road, trudging toward that faint glow. The snow was knee-deep, the sky a shifting storm of white. Lila's legs ached, but she pressed on, her mother's voice echoing in memory. "If you ever have nowhere to go, follow the light. It will lead you home." The words, once a lullaby, became a prayer. By the time they reached the wooden gate of an old farm, Noah could barely stand. Lila knelt, lifting him into her arms, though her own body shook with fatigue. The house ahead was small, its porch lamp flickering like a star refusing to die. She climbed the steps, each one creaking under the weight of snow, and knocked. The sound was soft, hesitant, like someone unsure they deserved to be heard. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open, revealing a warm light that spilled across the porch. Inside stood an old man, Walter Briggs, 71, with silver hair that curled under his wool cap, and a face carved by years of wind and labor. His blue eyes were sharp, yet kind, the kind of eyes that had seen loss but still chose mercy. "What are you children doing out here?" he asked, his voice rough but gentle. Lila bowed her head. "I'm sorry, sir. We just need a place to rest for a bit. My brother's cold." Walter's gaze lingered on their faces, pale, frightened, and covered in frost. After a pause, he stepped aside. "Come in. It's freezing out there." Warmth wrapped around them the moment they crossed the threshold. The air smelled of dry wood and herbal tea. A golden retriever stirred from beside the hearth, but didn't bark, merely lifted its head in quiet curiosity. Walter fetched a thick blanket and draped it over the children. "Sit," he said simply. "You're safe here." Noah clutched the mug of warm milk Walter handed him, eyes wide with gratitude. Lila whispered, "Thank you, sir," her voice cracking. Walter nodded, saying nothing more. He'd seen enough storms to know that sometimes the kindest thing you could give a soul was silence and warmth. Outside, the wind wailed across the open fields, but inside the farmhouse, for the first time in years, laughter, faint and hesitant, touched the walls again. Morning broke pale and brittle over Cedar Hollow. The storm had quieted, but the air still bit like glass. Outside the old farmhouse, a thin layer of frost glittered on every surface, fences, buckets, and the empty wooden swing that swayed gently in the cold wind. The world was silent except for the distant cry of crows above the frozen fields. Inside, the children stirred beneath thick wool blankets, their faces flushed from warmth and exhaustion. The old man, Walter Briggs, sat near the hearth sipping black coffee, his breath misting faintly in the chilled air. He'd been awake since dawn, the way men who have lived too long with solitude tend to be. Walter's face, lined deeply, told stories even he no longer tried to remember. He'd lost his wife 30 years ago, a quiet, patient woman named Marjorie who had died during a bad winter like this one. Since then, Walter had lived alone with his routines, feeding the animals, chopping wood, writing short notes to no one. When Lila woke, for a moment she didn't remember where she was. The smell of smoke, the warmth of the fire, the sound of a dog's soft breathing. It all felt unreal. She turned and saw the source of that sound. A large German shepherd, lying near the door, its fur black and tan, eyes the color of warm amber. The dog watched her with a steady calm, tail thumping softly once against the floorboards. Walter noticed and chuckled low in his throat. "That's Ranger," he said, nodding toward the animal. 5 years old, smartest creature I've ever met, and stubborn as a mule. He don't bite unless you give him reason to. Ranger stretched lazily, then trotted closer, sniffing Lila's hand before resting his head on her lap. His fur was warm, smelling faintly of pine and smoke. Lila smiled for the first time in days, whispering, "Hi, Ranger." The dog's ears twitched at her voice, and he let out a quiet huff, as if answering. Walter stood and poured milk into 2 tin cups. "You kids eat something before the day gets colder. The road's still snowed in. No one's coming or going till noon." Noah rubbed his eyes and sat up, his hair a wild tangle of brown curls. "We're not supposed to bother you," he said sleepily. "We can help clean or—" Walter waved him off. "You can help by eating. Talking comes later." His gruffness wasn't unkind, just the habit of someone who had long forgotten how to speak softly. After breakfast, Lila followed Walter outside. The sun had risen just enough to paint the world in shades of silver and blue. The old barn creaked in the wind, and somewhere beneath it, a frozen creek murmured. Walter carried a shovel, moving with the deliberate pace of a man who'd done everything alone for too many years. "You stay close," he said over his shoulder. "Snow looks pretty till you fall through it." Lila nodded, stepping carefully. She saw how Ranger never left Walter's side, watching him like a quiet guardian. When the man slipped on a patch of ice, Ranger immediately pressed against his leg, steadying him. The loyalty in that small motion stirred something inside her. "He really does take care of you," Lila murmured. Walter didn't turn, but smiled faintly. "Ain't many left who do." Inside the barn, the air smelled of hay and old leather. Walter began tossing grain into wooden troughs for 2 horses and a few hens that clucked irritably from their roosts. "They're just animals, but they keep the place breathing," he said. "You feed them. They remind you the world still needs you." Lila helped quietly, holding the bucket steady while he poured. He noticed how careful she was, small hands working with precision, as if afraid of breaking something precious. "You've done this before?" he asked. She shrugged. "At home, before things got bad." He didn't ask further. He recognized the tone of a child who had seen too much. Later, as the sun climbed higher, the rumble of an approaching truck broke the quiet. Walter stepped out, eyes narrowing. "That'll be Daniel, the local officer. Comes by every couple of days to check on us old fools." The vehicle came into view, a white police pickup with mud on the tires and a silver badge painted on the side. Behind the wheel sat Officer Daniel Reed, a man in his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, his face both kind and stern, the way lawmen in small towns often are. His skin was tanned from years outdoors. His jaw carried faint stubble that gave him a rugged weariness. His brown hair was tucked beneath a navy beanie, and his blue-gray eyes, sharp yet gentle, missed nothing. As he stepped from the truck, his boots sank deep into the snow. Daniel had grown up in Cedar Hollow and never really left. Once, he'd been married. His wife, Sarah, a nurse at the town hospital, had died in a house fire 5 years earlier. The same fire had taken their daughter, Lily, barely 8 years old. Since then, he'd buried his grief beneath the rhythm of duty. Only Ranger, his partner on the force, had stayed with him through those empty years. Until Ranger's injury 2 winters ago had forced early retirement. Daniel had asked Walter to keep the dog on his farm to recover, and in doing so, A friendship had quietly formed between two men who rarely spoke of loss but recognized it in each other. He waved at Walter. "Morning, old man," he said, his voice carrying warmth beneath its roughness. "Didn't expect company out here." His gaze shifted to the children, who hovered near the barn door. "Who do we have here?" Walter explained briefly, sparing unnecessary details. Daniel's expression softened as he looked at Lila and Noah, two small souls standing against a backdrop of endless snow. He crouched to meet their eyes. "You're safe here," he said simply. "But it's not good for kids to be out in this cold alone. Do you have any family nearby?" Lila hesitated. Her instinct told her not to trust uniforms. She'd seen enough shouting and fear in her short life. But something in Daniel's tone, calm and steady, reminded her of her father before the drinking began. "We don't," she murmured. "We were told to leave." Daniel frowned, glancing at Walter. The old man met his eyes, wordlessly confirming the truth. "I'll make a few calls," Daniel said. "See if anyone reported missing children. Until then, they stay here." He spent the next hour fixing a section of Walter's fence that had collapsed under snow. Lila watched him work, his movements confident and precise. He handled tools the way other men handled words, efficiently, with quiet strength. Noah followed Ranger around, laughing when the dog dropped a stick at his feet. Daniel paused to watch, a small smile ghosting across his face, though sadness flickered behind it. By late afternoon, the sky darkened again. Snow began to drift lazily through the air, settling over the frozen pond that stretched behind the cabin. Walter brewed tea, the air inside thick with the scent of pine and smoke. Daniel stood by the window, talking softly into his radio, his voice low and professional. "Dispatch, this is Reed. No missing children reported. I'll check again tomorrow. They'll stay here tonight." When he turned, Lila was watching him. He gave her a small nod. "You did the right thing coming here," he said. For the first time since she left home, Lila felt her heartbeat slow, steady. She looked at Noah, asleep by the fire, with Ranger curled beside him, and whispered to Daniel, "Is he your dog?" Daniel nodded. "He used to be my partner. We've both seen too much bad weather." Lila traced the dog's ear gently. "He doesn't look scared." Daniel's voice softened. "That's because he knows there's still good in people. You just have to find it again." As the storm thickened outside, Walter dozed in his chair. Daniel remained near the window, one hand resting on the radio, the other on the back of a chair, watching the fire dance across the children's faces. Something inside him shifted, faint but certain. Maybe, he thought, not all lost things were meant to stay lost. When he finally stepped outside, the wind had died. Across the lake, the sky opened just enough for a faint line of pink light to bleed through the clouds. Ranger followed him out, sitting quietly beside his leg. Daniel looked down at the tracks leading from the forest, the same tracks that had brought two children to this place. He murmured under his breath, "You brought them to me, didn't you, boy?" Ranger tilted his head, his eyes gleaming in the half-light. Daniel sighed, his breath clouding the air. "Guess the world's not done with us yet." Behind them, inside the cabin, the children slept safe and warm for the first time in weeks. Outside, the wind carried the faint cry of an owl, and the first star appeared above the frozen hills, quiet proof that even the longest winter night eventually gives way to dawn. The morning after the storm arrived soft and blue, the kind of light that turned frost into glass. Cedar Hollow lay under a silence so pure it felt sacred. From the cabin window, the frozen lake stretched wide and pale, rimmed by pine trees still heavy with snow. Inside, a new rhythm had begun to form, one not of fear, but of hesitant normalcy. Walter moved about the kitchen with the ease of habit, a kettle steaming over the wood stove. The smell of coffee and oats filled the air, grounding the morning in warmth. Lila sat at the table beside Noah, brushing crumbs from her scarf. Her eyes, soft hazel flecked with green, followed Ranger as he padded lazily toward the door. The dog stopped briefly to nudge her knee with his nose, a silent check that she was still there, still safe. Daniel Reed leaned against the window frame, arms folded, watching the snowfall ease into a lazy drift. He wore a dark gray flannel shirt beneath his police jacket, his badge dull under the firelight. He hadn't left yet, though part of him knew he should have returned to town hours ago. But something about the cabin, Its quiet, the children's laughter, the way Ranger stayed close to them, made him linger. Walter noticed. "You planning to move in, officer?" he asked gruffly, though there was humor beneath the rasp. Daniel smiled faintly. "Not yet, but I've got questions that can't wait." He turned to the children. "Do you remember where you came from? Maybe a street name or a neighbor's name?" Noah looked up from his bowl, his small hand gripping the spoon like it was something to hold on to in case the world vanished again. "It was a blue house," he said, "with a broken porch step." Lila stayed silent, staring at the silver bracelet on her wrist, the only thing that gleamed in that muted morning light. Daniel noticed the bracelet for the first time. It was delicate, old, engraved with faint letters, A and M. He stepped closer. "That's a beautiful bracelet," he said gently. "Where did you get it?" Lila hesitated, then lifted her wrist a little. "It was my mom's," she whispered. "She said as long as I wear it, I'll find kind people." Daniel crouched beside her, the floor creaking softly beneath his boots. "Your mother sounds like someone special." Lila's gaze didn't waver. "She was. She always knew when I was scared, even before I said anything." Something stirred in Daniel's chest, a strange, echoing ache. He had heard that same tone once, in another girl's voice, his own daughter, Lily. The way she had said, "Dad, it's okay," when he'd been too broken to speak after her mother's funeral. For a moment, the air between him and Lila seemed to hold that same ghostly comfort. Walter poured him a cup of coffee, interrupting the thought. "She said her mother's name was Amelia," he muttered, as if recalling something. Daniel's grip tightened slightly on the cup. The name cut through his memory like a spark in darkness. "Amelia Moore?" he asked quietly. Walter looked up, brow furrowing. "How'd you know that name?" Daniel exhaled. I knew an Amelia once. She used to teach at the elementary school before she moved away. That was years ago." He didn't add what burned behind those words, that he had once pulled a young woman from a burning vehicle on a snowy highway, that she had whispered a name before she lost consciousness. He had carried the guilt of not saving her passenger ever since. Outside, the wind shifted. Ranger's ears perked up. The dog rose, alert, pacing toward the porch. Daniel followed his gaze and saw tire tracks half buried in fresh snow. He frowned. "No one comes up here unless they have a reason." Walter set his mug down. "Might be the mail truck, or it might not." The sound of an approaching engine grew clearer. Lila flinched at the noise. Daniel motioned for the children to stay inside, then stepped out with Ranger close at his heel. The truck came to a slow stop near the gate, a dark sedan with the government plates. A woman stepped out, tall and poised, her coat military gray. Her name badge read Marilyn Harper, and the cold efficiency in her movements marked her instantly as a social worker. She was in her late 40s, her blonde hair streaked with silver, tied neatly in a bun. Her pale blue eyes had the detached clarity of someone who had spent too many years in bureaucratic trenches. "Officer Reed," she greeted curtly. "We received word from dispatch about 2 found minors. I was sent from County Child Services to assess their situation." Her tone wasn't unkind, but it was wrapped in procedure. Daniel nodded slowly. "They're safe here. We're still trying to locate their father." Marilyn flipped open her folder. "Andrew Moore, last known address in Cedar Hollow. I already called his residence." No answer. She paused, lowering her voice. "He's had prior reports. Alcohol abuse, domestic negligence." Daniel's jaw tightened. So they were telling the truth. Marilyn glanced toward the cabin. "They can't stay here indefinitely, officer. There's a foster center in Brimfield with open beds." Daniel's expression hardened. "I know the one. It's overcrowded, underfunded, and 100 miles of ice roads away. They're safer here for now." She studied him for a moment, then closed her folder. "You've always been the type to bend rules when your conscience stirs," she said quietly. There was no accusation in her voice, more like weary respect. "But keep in mind, the system has long arms." Ranger gave a low growl, sensing the tension. Marilyn stepped back slightly, her heels crunching the snow. "Fine," she conceded. "A few days, but I'll return." Her eyes softened briefly as she looked at the cabin windows where 2 small faces peeked through the frost. "They look like good kids," she said. "Let's hope they get what they deserve, something better than most." Then she turned and left, the car's tires cutting a dark line through the white. When Daniel went back inside, Lila's small voice broke the silence. "Are they going to take us away?" He looked at her, at the fear buried deep beneath her calm. "No," he said firmly. "Not unless you want to leave." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, though doubt lingered in her eyes. Noah climbed into her lap, and Ranger lay beside them, his head resting near their feet, as if keeping watch. Walter set another log on the fire. "That woman was right about one thing," he said. "You can't keep them hidden from the world forever." Daniel rubbed his temples. "I'm not hiding them. I'm buying time. Enough to figure out who they really are, and why that bracelet feels like I've seen it before." Later that evening, after Walter had gone to bed and the children had fallen asleep near the fire, Daniel sat alone by the window. Snowflakes pressed softly against the glass, melting into tiny rivers of light. Ranger lay at his feet, eyes half closed, but every so often his ears twitched as if listening to something unseen. Daniel turned the bracelet over in his hand. Lila had let him examine it before bed. The engraving was old, nearly worn away, but still legible. A&M Amelia Moore. He remembered the night of the fire, how the woman he'd saved had murmured the name of her daughter through cracked lips before she went still. He'd told himself she hadn't survived, but now, staring into the embers, he wasn't so sure. Maybe life had a cruel way of circling back, forcing him to face the ghosts he thought he'd buried under duty. He looked at Ranger, who lifted his head as if reading his thoughts. "You brought them here," Daniel whispered. "Didn't you, boy?" The dog blinked slowly, then turned his gaze toward the sleeping children, his tail thumping once against the floor. Outside, the wind began to rise again, carrying the faint sound of something distant. Maybe thunder, or maybe the start of another storm. Daniel leaned back, eyes fixed on the dying fire. "Whatever happens next," he murmured, "we're not letting them go." And for the first time in 5 long years, he believed it. The days that followed settled into a fragile kind of peace. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, hills blanketed in white, pine boughs heavy with frost, and a sky so pale it looked like it had forgotten how to be blue. The cabin by the lake had become more than shelter. It was a sanctuary stitched together by firelight, silence, and the small sounds that made life feel real again. The scrape of wood against the stove, the crackle of burning logs, the rhythmic tap of Ranger's claws across the floorboards. Inside, Officer Daniel Reed had grown used to waking before dawn. Habit, maybe, or guilt disguised as discipline. He'd step outside with a mug of coffee, the steam coiling into the cold, and watch the faint sun rise behind the ridge. Most mornings, Ranger joined him, the dog's thick fur glinting amber in the early light. The German Shepherd was 5 years old, strong and sharp-minded, but the limp in his right leg, a scar from an old gunshot wound, reminded Daniel that even heroes carry damage they can't outrun. Ranger's loyalty was silent and absolute. He didn't seek affection, but gave it freely, choosing moments when the world was quiet enough to listen. Lila and Noah, in their own ways, began to thaw from fear into laughter. Walter often found them sitting by the window, drawing shapes on fog glass or pressing their noses against it to watch the snow fall. They'd grown attached to Ranger, who tolerated their hugs with patient dignity. Lila, especially, had started speaking more, small fragments at first, then stories about her mother, Amelia. There was a wisdom in her words that didn't belong to a child, the kind carved from loss. Daniel listened quietly when she talked, his heart tightening with every mention of Amelia's name. Walter Briggs watched this new household unfold with the quiet pride of a man who'd seen enough broken things to recognize when something was being mended. He'd become a grandfatherly figure, though he never said the word aloud. Sometimes, while feeding the chickens or shoveling snow, he caught himself humming again, an old habit that had disappeared with Marjorie, his late wife. He didn't question its return. One evening, as the last light of day bled into gold, Walter noticed Daniel staring at a small photograph on the mantel. It was faded, a picture of a woman with light brown hair, soft eyes, and a laugh captured mid-smile. "Amelia Moore," Walter said softly. Daniel didn't look away. "She used to teach at the elementary school, right?" Walter nodded. "Yes, she came out here once years ago. She brought cookies for the horses, if you can believe it." He chuckled at the memory. "She said kindness wasn't supposed to make sense. It was just supposed to happen. Daniel's jaw tightened. She died in a fire outside the highway, he said. I was the first officer there. His voice lowered, heavy with guilt. I pulled her out, but there was someone else in the car, her husband. We couldn't save him. Walter placed a hand on his shoulder. And you've been carrying that weight ever since. Daniel exhaled, eyes dark with memory. Maybe. But now her children are sitting by my fire, wearing the same bracelet she never took off. Before Walter could answer, Ranger's low growl broke through the moment. The dog stood rigid near the door, hackles raised, nose twitching toward the forest. Daniel stepped to the window. Far beyond the field, a flicker of movement, a shadow shifting through the trees, too large for a deer, too deliberate for the wind. He reached for his coat. Stay here, he told Walter. Keep the kids inside. Ranger was already at the door, ears high, body tense. Together they stepped into the twilight. The snow muffled every sound. Daniel moved with care, his boots sinking deep with each step. Ranger led, nose low, tracing a scent Daniel couldn't sense. Smoke, maybe, or something human. The air was sharp enough to sting. The tracks led to the edge of the frozen creek, where a small, dark figure knelt beside the water. Daniel raised his flashlight. The beam caught on the curve of a worn leather bag, a man's broad back, and the gleam of a flask. Andrew Moore, Daniel called. The man turned slowly. Andrew looked older than his 42 years, his face drawn and hollow, eyes glassy from drink. His beard was unkempt, his clothes wet from snow and travel. Officer, he muttered, shielding his eyes from the light. Didn't expect company. Daniel lowered the flashlight slightly. You're a hard man to find. Andrew gave a bitter laugh. Not hard enough, it seems. His voice cracked, somewhere between anger and shame. They're here, aren't they? My kids. Daniel didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, filled with the sound of the creek groaning under thin ice. They're safe, he said at last. Warm, fed. Andrew nodded slowly, as if the words both relieved and punished him. Good. That's more than I ever gave them. He rubbed his hands together, trembling. I went back home, you know. The place was empty. Evelyn's gone. Took what was left and vanished. Guess I drove her to it. Daniel studied him. She drove herself. You just let her steer. Andrew looked up sharply, guilt cutting through the fog of drink. You think I don't know that? He said. I used to be a good man, a good father. Then Amelia died and I didn't know how to breathe without her. His voice broke, the words falling like stones. I thought if I drowned it out, it'd hurt less. But it just made me someone my kids needed saving from. Ranger stepped forward, sniffing at Andrew's sleeve. The man flinched, then slowly reached down, letting the dog press his head against his knee. Funny, he murmured. Even your dog knows when a man's rotten. Daniel shook his head. He knows when someone's trying to make it right. The wind picked up, carrying the faint echo of Lila's laughter from the cabin. Andrew froze, the sound hitting him like a knife and a balm all at once. She still laughs like Amelia, he whispered. Daniel hesitated. You can see them, but not tonight. They don't need another ghost haunting them before morning. Andrew's shoulders slumped. Fair enough. He looked toward the horizon, where the last light was dying. You tell her. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her old man's trying. I will, Daniel said quietly. When he returned to the cabin, Ranger shaking snow from his coat beside him, Walter was waiting at the door. That was him, wasn't it? Daniel nodded. He's not the monster they remember, just a man who forgot how to live. Walter sighed. Aren't we all? Inside, the fire burned low. Lila had fallen asleep beside Noah, their heads resting on Ranger's blanket. The silver bracelet glimmered faintly in the light. Daniel knelt to adjust the covers and paused when he noticed something. The bracelet had a tiny engraving on the inside he hadn't seen before. 2 words etched in fine cursive. Find the light. He sat back slowly, his breath catching. The phrase felt like a whisper across time, a voice he almost recognized. He looked toward the window. The storm had started again, flakes spinning wildly in the dark. But somewhere in that endless white, a faint warmth seemed to flicker, steady and alive. Daniel whispered, almost to himself, We're finding it, Amelia, bit by bit. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching as if he agreed. The fire popped once, and the cabin sank back into its quiet rhythm. 4 souls bound by loss, rediscovering the fragile art of being whole. The next morning dawned gray and brittle, the sky veiled in mist that blurred the edge of the lake. Frost clung to every window pane, tracing ghostly veins of ice. Inside the cabin, the warmth of the fireplace fought against the cold that crept in through the cracks. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, the silver bracelet lying before him like a question he couldn't answer. The words, "Find the light," glimmered faintly in the dimness. Ranger rested at his feet, head between his paws, eyes alert even in half-sleep. The dog seemed to sense Daniel's unrest. His tail thumped once, a quiet reassurance. Walter entered from the porch, brushing snow from his coat. "The storm's dying out," he said. "We might see clear skies by noon." He glanced at the bracelet on the table. "Still thinking about her?" Daniel nodded, his gaze distant. "Amelia's gone, but she keeps finding ways to speak." He hesitated before adding, "I saw Andrew last night." Walter's brows lifted slightly. "And?" "He's broken," Daniel said simply. "But he's trying." The sound of small footsteps interrupted them. Lila appeared, her hair tousled from sleep, Noah trailing behind her, with Ranger's old collar slung over his shoulder like a prize. "Mr. Daniel," Lila said shyly, "can we go outside today? The snow looks softer now." Daniel smiled faintly. "We'll go after breakfast, but stay close to Ranger." Noah nodded solemnly. "He's our soldier dog." By mid-morning, the world had shifted from gray to silver. Daniel and Walter repaired the old fence by the barn, while Lila and Noah built a snow fort nearby. Ranger patrolled between them, a silent guardian with watchful amber eyes. The moment felt almost normal, a scene that could have belonged to another life. But peace in Cedar Hollow rarely lasted long. Around noon, the distant hum of an approaching vehicle cut through the quiet. Daniel's instincts sharpened. He wiped his hands on his jacket and turned toward the road. The dark sedan that appeared was unfamiliar, its engine coughing against the cold. As it rolled to a stop, Daniel recognized the man stepping out even before the door shut. Andrew Moore looked cleaner than he had the night before, but no less weary. He had shaved, revealing a face marked by exhaustion rather than age. His coat was buttoned wrong, his boots dusted with snow. He carried no flask this time, only a folded letter in one hand. Behind him sat a woman in the passenger seat, younger, sharp-eyed, her lips painted a red too bright for the muted landscape. Evelyn. Her beauty was brittle, her posture stiff as if she were balancing pride and fear on the same edge. The wind caught her scarf, tossing it across her face before she smoothed it down with impatient fingers. "Andrew," Daniel greeted carefully, stepping forward. "Didn't expect you so soon." Andrew nodded awkwardly. "I didn't come to make trouble. I just needed to see them." His eyes drifted toward the children playing by the fence. When he saw Lila's small form, he faltered. Evelyn climbed out of the car, her heels sinking slightly into the snow. "Well, you've seen them," she said sharply. "Now we can take them home, can't we?" Her voice carried the clipped confidence of someone who always believed she could outtalk justice. She was in her early 30s, her auburn hair styled perfectly despite the weather. But her eyes, gray and restless, betrayed unease. Daniel's tone cooled. "You're not taking anyone anywhere until we talk." Walter emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, sizing the newcomers up with quiet suspicion. Ranger stood between him and the children, his fur bristling, low growl rumbling deep in his throat. Lila and Noah had stopped playing. They clung to each other, instinctively reading the tension. Andrew raised his hands slightly. "Easy, officer. I'm not here to fight. I came to explain." He turned toward Lila, his voice trembling. "Sweetheart, I know I don't deserve it, but I needed to tell you, I'm sorry. I wasn't strong after your mom passed. I let someone else fill the silence she left behind." His glance flicked toward Evelyn, guilt carving new lines into his face. "I thought she could help. I was wrong." Evelyn laughed, a sound without warmth. "Don't start rewriting history, Andrew. You were just too weak to handle a woman who wouldn't worship your ghost wife." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's enough." His tone held the kind of authority that made even Evelyn's words freeze midair. She crossed her arms. "What? You think keeping them in this freezing cabin makes you some kind of savior? Lila stepped forward then, surprising everyone. Her small face was pale but steady. "We're not scared here," she said. "You made Daddy scared. You made us hide." Her voice shook, but her words didn't. Evelyn's mouth opened, then closed again, unable to summon a defense. Andrew looked like a man unraveling. "She's right," he whispered. "You brought more cold into that house than winter ever could." He turned back to Daniel. "Let me do something right for once. I'll talk to the county. I'll tell them I'm unfit. They can stay here with you." Evelyn's eyes widened. "You'll what?" she hissed. "After everything I—" He cut her off, his voice steady for the first time in years. "After everything you helped destroy, Evelyn, I won't let it happen again." Walter stepped closer, his breath fogging in the air. "There's a sheriff's office down the road if you want to make this official, but right now, maybe you ought to leave before you say something you can't unsay." Evelyn's glare sliced through the air like a blade. She took a step toward Lila, but Ranger moved instantly, his growl deep and dangerous, his teeth flashing white, Oli against the snow. Evelyn froze, then backed away, trembling with outrage. "You'll regret this," she spat, retreating toward the car. "You'll all regret this." Andrew didn't follow her. He stood staring at the children as the car tires spun and disappeared into the trees. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the soft thump of snow falling from the roof. Daniel finally spoke. "You did the right thing." Andrew's eyes glistened. "It doesn't feel like it." Daniel gestured toward the cabin. "Come inside. You can talk to them properly." Inside, the air was warm again, thick with the smell of burning pine. Lila sat on the couch, Noah curled against her side. Andrew knelt in front of them, his hands shaking. "I can't fix what I broke," he said quietly, "but I can promise I won't run from it anymore." Lila stared at him for a long moment, then reached out and touched his hand. Not forgiveness, but a beginning. When he finally stood, he turned to Daniel. "Thank you for keeping them alive when I couldn't." Daniel shook his head. "They saved me as much as I saved them." That night, long after Andrew had gone to stay in the small cabin across the ridge Walter offered him, Daniel stepped outside. Ranger followed, padding silently beside him. Across the snow-covered fields, faint lights glimmered from the highway, distant, human, fleeting. Daniel thought of Evelyn's anger, Andrew's shame, Amelia's ghost, and the two children sleeping beneath his roof, all the broken pieces slowly finding their way toward the light. He looked down at Ranger. "We'll keep them safe, no matter what." The dog's ears twitched at his voice. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, a long, mournful note that echoed across the frozen valley. Daniel lifted his gaze to the sky, where the stars had finally broken through the clouds. For the first time in years, he let himself believe that even a wounded family could find its way home. By the end of the week, Cedar Hollow felt eerily quiet again, the kind of calm that never lasted long. The wind had changed, sharper, restless, stirring the lake into soft ripples that caught the fading afternoon light. From the ridge, the cabin looked small and solitary, smoke rising thin and steady from its chimney. Inside, Daniel fixed the cracked latch on the window, while Walter hummed softly as he mended a torn coat by the fire. The children were in the corner, building a small wooden house from leftover kindling. Ranger slept near them, his ears twitching whenever Noah giggled too loud. The peace of it all was deceptive, like the stillness before a storm. Daniel could feel it in his bones, a tension crawling beneath the quiet. Since Evelyn's outburst days ago, he had filed a report to the county sheriff, ensuring her restraining order would hold. But a part of him knew that women like her rarely disappeared quietly. He had seen her type before, people who couldn't let go of control because they feared what losing it would reveal. Outside, gray clouds began to roll in from the north. Walter noticed first, squinting toward the horizon. "Storm's coming sooner than I thought," he muttered, pushing to his feet. "We'll need to bring in more firewood." Daniel nodded and grabbed his jacket. "I'll take Ranger and check the fence while there's light." Lila looked up from her small wooden house. "Can we help?" Daniel smiled. "Not this time, kiddo. You and Noah keep Walter company, and don't let him eat all the cookies." Noah grinned. "He already did yesterday." Walter scowled half-heartedly. "Snitch." By the time Daniel and Ranger reached the edge of the property, the wind had begun to rise, carrying flakes of snow that drifted sideways. Ranger moved ahead, his tail low, posture alert. He paused often, nose to the ground, sniffing at scents only he could read. The forest beyond the fence was a skeletal maze of trees, dark trunks, heavy snow, and silence broken only by the crack of branches. Daniel fixed the loose posts quickly, working with the practiced movements of a man used to solitude. "Almost done, boy," he said quietly when Ranger suddenly stiffened. The dog's ears pricked, head turning toward the tree line. His growl was low and steady. Daniel straightened slowly, following his gaze. At first he saw nothing. Then, a flicker of color, a shape between the trees, a red scarf. Evelyn. She was standing 20 yards away, her coat buttoned high, her face pale beneath the cold. But her eyes, those gray restless eyes, still carried that same calculating gleam. Behind her stood two men Daniel didn't recognize, both in heavy coats, built like factory workers. One bald, one wearing a beanie pulled low. Their posture was tense, their presence wrong. Daniel's voice dropped. "You need to leave." Evelyn smiled thinly, stepping forward. "I just came to talk." Her lipstick was darker now, her voice honeyed but brittle. "You've taken something that belongs to me." "They don't belong to anyone," Daniel replied evenly. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Children need their mother figure, don't they?" Ranger's growl deepened. The two men shifted, one resting his hand on his belt, and Daniel caught the faint glint of a weapon. His training kicked in instantly. He stepped slightly in front of Ranger, one hand sliding to the holster beneath his jacket. "You made your choice when you left," he said. "Don't make another mistake." Evelyn's voice hardened. "You think you can hide behind that badge forever? The county listens to money, not ghosts." "I don't hide behind anything," he said quietly. "But you might want to start running before you do something you can't undo." For a long second, no one moved. Then Evelyn snapped her fingers once. The man in the beanie lunged forward. Ranger moved first. A blur of tan and black, the dog launched into the snow, his bark splitting the silence. Daniel drew his gun, shouting, "Stop!" But the second man swung a shovel from behind a tree, knocking Ranger sideways. The sound cracked through Daniel like bone. He fired a warning shot into the air, the sound exploding across the frozen land. Birds scattered from the trees in a storm of black wings. Evelyn flinched, her confidence cracking. Daniel's voice was steel now. "You touch that dog again, and you'll regret it." The men froze, their bravado faltering. Ranger, wounded but standing, bared his teeth, blood bright against white snow. Evelyn hesitated, then turned on her heel. "This isn't over?" she hissed. "You can't play savior forever." She stalked away, her boots crunching through the snow, the two men retreating after her. Daniel didn't lower his gun until they vanished into the trees. He dropped to his knees beside Ranger. "Easy, boy, easy." The wound on the dog's shoulder wasn't deep, but blood darkened his fur. Daniel pressed a gloved hand against it, breathing through clenched teeth. "You're okay, we're okay." Ranger licked his wrist once, then leaned against him, eyes half closed. By the time they returned to the cabin, night had fallen. Lila saw the blood first and gasped. "Ranger!" she cried, rushing forward. Daniel held up a hand. "He's all right, just a scratch." Noah clung to the dog's neck, whispering, "You're brave." Walter fetched a basin of warm water and a towel. "Sit him by the fire," he said gruffly. "Let's clean that up before it freezes." While they worked, Daniel told them only part of the truth, that Evelyn had shown up, that she was gone now. He didn't mention the men or the gun. Some truths, he thought, could wait until morning. Later, when the children had gone to bed, Walter sat across from him, pouring a cup of coffee. "She's not finished," the old man said. "I know," Daniel replied. He stared at Ranger, sleeping fitfully by the fire. "But neither are we." The storm outside grew wild again, snow lashing the windows, wind howling through the pines. Daniel stood and checked the locks, his hand brushing the frame of the window Lila had been decorating with paper snowflakes earlier that afternoon. The innocence of it, the fragile normalcy, struck him with unexpected force. He turned toward the fire, eyes shadowed. "Walter," he said quietly, "if something happens to me—" The old man cut him off. "Nothing's happening to you, son. You've got that dog, those kids, and one hell of a stubborn streak. She's not taking that from you." Daniel smiled faintly. though it didn't reach his eyes. "You sound like my father." "Maybe I am," Walter said, his gaze softening. "Maybe I just remember what it's like to lose everything once." The wind slammed against the roof like a drumbeat, but inside, the fire held steady. Ranger stirred in his sleep, tail twitching as if chasing some invisible threat in his dreams. Daniel sat by his side, one hand resting gently on the dog's fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of life beneath it. Outside, in the snow-drowned dark, faint headlights flickered and disappeared again into the forest, proof that the storm was not over, and neither was Evelyn. The blizzard that raged through Cedar Hollow lasted 2 full days. Snow piled against the doors and windows of the cabin until the world beyond looked like a white blur. Inside, the hearth burned endlessly, fed by Walter's strong, calloused hands and Daniel's quiet vigilance. The children had turned the living room into a small fortress of blankets and pillows, while Ranger, his shoulder freshly bandaged, guarded them like a knight watching over his kingdom. His fur was rougher now where the wound was, but his eyes burned with their old intelligence. Whenever Noah reached out to pat him, the dog's tail flicked lightly, his patience endless, despite the soreness in his muscles. By the third night, the storm began to thin, the wind growing tired. Lila lay on the rug, tracing her finger along the silver bracelet that never left her wrist. Daniel watched her from across the room, sipping from a chipped mug. Every time his eyes met that bracelet, something inside him tightened, a memory, an echo of a promise made to someone who no longer lived to hear it. Walter finally broke the silence. "I called Sheriff Dunley this morning, told him about what happened." He sat forward, his voice gravelly but firm. "He's sending a deputy up tomorrow to take statements." Daniel frowned. "Good. The sooner we make it official, the safer we'll be." Walter nodded. "Though he said something that bothered me." "What's that?" "That Evelyn woman. She's been seen in Brimfield, talking to a man named Vance Tiller." Walter glanced at Daniel. "You remember him?" Daniel's jaw set. "Yeah, used to work construction. Got arrested twice for extortion. She's moving fast." Lila, who had been quietly listening, sat up. "Is she coming back?" Daniel met her eyes. "Not if I can help it." He didn't tell her that people like Evelyn didn't stop until someone stopped them first. The next day, true to Walter's word, a police truck rumbled through the snow toward the cabin. A man stepped out, Deputy Cole Harris, in his late 20s, broad-shouldered and steady-eyed. He wore his uniform like he'd been born to it, but there was a softness about him, the kind born from compassion rather than authority. "Morning," he greeted, brushing snow from his cap. "Sheriff sent me up to take your report. Heard things got heated out here." Daniel extended a hand. "Cole Harris. Didn't expect them to send you this far up the ridge." Cole shrugged, his smile small but genuine. "Sheriff said you'd probably be the only one calm enough to make sense of the mess. Figured I'd see it myself." His gaze drifted to the children peeking from the window. "So, these are the kids." "Lila and Noah," Daniel said softly. Cole nodded respectfully to them before stepping inside. "Cute. They look tougher than most recruits." Walter chuckled. "They've earned that title." Once everyone was settled, Daniel recounted the events, Evelyn's intrusion, the hired men, the brief fight, and her escape into the storm. Cole wrote everything down carefully in a small leather notebook. His handwriting was neat, methodical. When Daniel finished, Cole sighed. "We'll file it as an attempted abduction. I'll have patrol cars watch the main roads. But between us," he hesitated. "She's got friends in Brimfield who know how to disappear." "I know," Daniel said quietly. "That's why I'm keeping them here, until the court settles custody." Cole's eyes softened. "You always were the kind to take on ghosts, Reed." He paused, looking toward Ranger. "That dog of yours still got more sense than most men." Daniel smirked. "Always did." Before Cole left, he bent down beside Lila, his voice gentle. "You're safe here, all right. No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go." She nodded, clutching the bracelet on her wrist. For a moment, Cole's gaze lingered on it. "That belonged to your mom?" Lila smiled faintly. "Yes. She said it would help me find good people." Cole stood, glancing at Daniel. "Seems like it worked." When the deputy finally left, the day dimmed into another bruised dusk. Snow still fell lightly, brushing the tops of the pines. Daniel walked outside for air, his breath forming ghosts in the cold. Ranger followed him, tail low, his steps crunching in perfect rhythm beside his master. They stopped by the frozen lake, its surface glinting under a faint moon. Daniel crouched, running his hand through Ranger's fur. "You took a hit for them," he said softly, "just like before." The dog pressed his head against Daniel's arm, eyes half closed. "You remember Amelia, don't you?" Daniel murmured. "You were there that night. You smelled the smoke before anyone else. You found her." Ranger's ears twitched at the sound of her name. It was as if the dog understood, as if he too carried pieces of that night in his memory. Behind them, a voice called out, "Daniel!" It was Walter, trudging through the snow with a lantern in hand. "You should come inside. The radio just caught something strange." Back inside, the old wooden radio crackled with static before resolving into a faint voice. "Brimfield County reports. Possible altercation near Route 9. Abandoned vehicle registered to Evelyn Moore." Daniel's pulse quickened. "She's moving again." Walter turned down the volume. "You think she's heading this way?" Daniel stared into the fire. "She's not the type to give up after one failed plan. She's regrouping, and she's desperate." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire long after the others had gone to bed, the bracelet glinting faintly on the mantel where Lila had left it to dry. The etched words, "Find the light," shimmered like a eye whisper. He thought about Amelia again, about the night she died, about the small silver chain that had fallen from her neck into his hands. He'd kept it for years without knowing why. Now he understood. Some promises never die. They just wait for their time to be fulfilled. The next morning, Daniel decided to take the children into town. "We need to file the papers for temporary guardianship," he told Walter. "I won't risk them getting lost in the system." Walter frowned. "You sure it's safe?" "I'll have Cole meet us halfway. The roads are clear." By noon, the truck was ready, packed with supplies and blankets. Lila sat in the front, holding the bracelet like a talisman, Noah asleep beside her. Ranger lay in the back seat, bandaged but alert, his eyes scanning the snowy world as it rolled past. As they drove down the long road that curved through the valley, Daniel noticed tire tracks ahead, faint, half covered by snow. His grip on the wheel tightened. "Stay quiet," he said softly. Ranger's growl rumbled from the back seat. Then from behind a bend, another vehicle appeared, the same black sedan that had haunted his thoughts for days. It was stopped by the roadside, engine running, driver's door open. No one was inside. Lila whispered, "Is that her car?" Daniel nodded once. "Stay in the truck." He reached for his flashlight and stepped into the cold. Ranger followed. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they approached the car. The engine sputtered softly, still warm. On the passenger seat lay a single red scarf, and beside it, a small photograph. A picture of Evelyn and two men standing in front of a motel. One of them was Vance Tiller. Daniel's eyes darkened. "She's nearby?" Ranger barked once, sharp, warning, and turned toward the woods. Somewhere in that frozen silence, a branch snapped. Daniel lifted his gun. "Back in the truck, boy," he whispered. The dog didn't move. His body stiffened, his growl low and constant. And then, through the blur of falling snow, came a voice, hoarse, trembling, but unmistakably female. "Daniel!" He froze. It was Evelyn. Her shape emerged from between the trees, clothes torn, face pale. But her eyes, the arrogance was gone. They were wild, terrified. She stumbled forward, gasping. "They're coming! You don't understand. It wasn't just me." Daniel raised his flashlight, but before he could speak, a second sound tore through the silence. The crunch of multiple footsteps, deliberate, approaching fast from the dark woods. Ranger barked again, louder this time, fur bristling like fire. The storm, it seemed, was returning. But this time, it wasn't made of snow. The moment Evelyn's trembling voice cracked the silence, the forest came alive. Snow shifted under unseen boots. Tree branches quivered, and the wind carried the sharp tang of danger. Daniel's training roared awake. He pulled his gun from its holster in one smooth motion and placed himself between Evelyn and the oncoming noise. Ranger stood rigid, teeth bared, growling so low it vibrated through the frozen air. The children were still in the truck. Daniel could see Lila's terrified face through the window, her small hands gripping Noah's shoulders. "Who's coming?" Daniel demanded. Evelyn stumbled closer, clutching at her side. Her face was ashen, lips cracked from the cold. "Vance Tiller," she gasped. "And the others. I told them about you, to scare you. But now they want the kids. They said the girl's worth something. I didn't know they'd go this far." Her breath came out in white puffs. Her once perfect auburn hair was tangled and wet with melting snow. The woman who had once strutted with arrogance now looked hollow, desperate, a shadow of her cruelty. Daniel's eyes hardened. "Where are they?" Before she could answer, the first gunshot shattered the air. The bullet struck the snowbank near the truck, spraying white powder across the windshield. Lila screamed, ducking down, pulling Noah with her. Ranger lunged forward, barking furiously, but Daniel whistled sharply. "Stay!" he ordered, crouching low behind the open truck door. From the tree line, 3 figures emerged, silhouetted against the swirling snow. Vance Tiller led them, a man in his 40s with a heavy frame and a predator's calmness. His beard was rough, peppered with gray, and his left eye bore a faint scar that gave his face a permanent sneer. He wore a dark jacket that stretched across his shoulders like armor, and his gloved hands cradled a rifle as naturally as if it were part of him. Behind him came 2 others, one lanky with restless eyes, the other thick-necked and slow, both carrying shotguns. "Well, well," Vance called out, his voice rough but steady. "Officer Daniel Reed. Always thought you'd be smart enough not to meddle." He grinned coldly. "You took what wasn't yours. That girl should have been left where she was. She belongs to someone else now." Daniel's grip tightened on his weapon. "You picked the wrong night to start this." Evelyn took a step back, shivering violently. "I didn't mean for—" "Shut up," Vance snapped, swinging his rifle toward her. "You talk too much." That was all the warning Daniel needed. The shot rang out almost simultaneously with his movement. He ducked, firing twice in quick succession. One of the men staggered and fell, clutching his shoulder. Ranger, unleashed by instinct, bolted from cover, weaving through the snow like a dark streak. He hit the lanky gunman full force, teeth sinking into the man's arm, tearing the shotgun free. "Ranger down!" Daniel shouted, sprinting to the truck. Another bullet whizzed past, tearing through the edge of the door. Evelyn dove behind the vehicle, sobbing, while Daniel opened the door and yelled, "Lila, keep your head down." "I can't see you," she cried. "You don't need to. Just stay down and don't open the door until I say." Vance advanced through the snow, steady as death. His voice was calm, even as gunfire cracked around him. "You think you can protect them? You can't even protect yourself. You don't know what those kids are worth to people like me." Daniel fired again, forcing him to take cover behind a fallen log. He reloaded fast, mind running ahead of his heartbeat. He had one advantage: Ranger. The dog had circled behind the attackers, silent now, padding through the trees with the fluid grace of a hunter. His amber eyes glowed faintly through the snow haze. Daniel whistled once, a sharp, low note that cut through the storm. Ranger leapt. Vance turned too late. The German shepherd slammed into him, teeth closing on his coat sleeve. The rifle flew from his grip. He roared and struck the dog hard, but Ranger held fast. Daniel seized the opening. He rushed forward, kicking the weapon aside and driving Vance to the ground. The 2 men rolled in the snow, struggling, fists flying. Daniel's shoulder screamed with pain as Vance's elbow smashed into it. But he ignored it. He'd been a cop too long to give in now. Then, unexpectedly, Evelyn screamed. Daniel looked up to see the surviving gunman, thick-necked, bleeding but still standing, grabbing her by the arm. "You started this!" he snarled, dragging her toward the trees. Evelyn thrashed wildly. "Let go! They'll kill you!" Ranger lunged again, knocking the man off balance. Daniel sprinted forward, kicking the shotgun out of his hands and slamming him to the ground with a hard blow to the temple. The man went limp. For a moment, there was only the sound of wind, ragged breathing, and the soft whine of Ranger's exhaustion. Daniel knelt beside the dog, running a hand down his back. "Good boy. You did good." Vance stirred behind him, groaning. Daniel stood and pressed the muzzle of his pistol to the man's forehead. "It's over," he said coldly. "You're done." Vance spat into the snow, glaring up with defiance. "You think this ends with me? You don't even know what you've got there. The girl's mother. She made enemies. You can't keep the past buried forever." Daniel didn't answer. He He pulled a pair of cuffs from his belt and locked them around Vance's wrists. "Maybe not," he said, "but tonight I bury you." Evelyn sat slumped near the truck, her mascara streaked, her face ghostly in the moonlight. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "I just wanted him to love me." Daniel looked at her, something like pity flickering across his features. "Love doesn't destroy what it touches," he said. "You've got a long road to learn that." By the time Sheriff Dunley and Deputy Cole arrived, called by Daniel's distress signal, the snow had turned pink with dawn. The forest glistened under the pale morning light, its horrors half hidden by beauty. Cole stepped out first, scanning the scene. 2 wounded men, one unconscious, one handcuffed, Evelyn trembling beside the truck, and Ranger sitting proudly near Daniel's feet despite the blood streaking his fur. "You all right?" Cole asked quietly. Daniel nodded. "It's over." "Looks like it," Cole said, glancing at the children peeking from the truck, their faces pressed to the window. "But you know how this works, Reed. This kind of trouble leaves echoes." Daniel looked toward the horizon, where the snow met the rising light. "Then we'll face them, one at a time." Cole gave a faint smile. "You always did like doing things the hard way." As the deputies loaded Vance and his men into their vehicles, Evelyn turned to Daniel one last time. "Will you tell them that I tried to stop it?" He met her gaze. "I'll tell them the truth," he said simply. She nodded once, eyes empty, then let the deputies lead her away. When the last car disappeared down the mountain road, silence returned, clean and profound. Lila ran from the truck and threw her arms around Daniel's waist. "I thought you were gone," she whispered. He knelt, brushing her hair from her face. "You won't lose me that easy." Noah hugged Ranger, who licked the boy's cheek, tail wagging weakly. The dog leaned into the warmth of the children, his breath fogging in the chill air. Walter's truck rumbled up moments later, his old frame jumping down with surprising speed. "Heard the radio," he said, eyes flicking over the scene. "You did good, son. You all did." Daniel exhaled, finally letting his shoulders relax. The sun was rising now, staining the snow gold. For the first time in what felt like forever, the light didn't feel like something distant. It felt like something earned. The storm had finally broken. After days of violence and fear, Cedar Hollow lay beneath a blanket of fresh snow, so white and unmarked it looked like forgiveness itself. The sun rose slowly, scattering gold across the trees and rooftops, melting the edges of what had once been chaos. Daniel stood on the porch of the cabin, the cold air stinging his skin but clearing his mind. Ranger lay at his feet, bandaged but alert, his fur ruffling gently in the wind. The dog's eyes followed the children, who were chasing each other through the yard, their laughter bright and light as chimes. For the first time in a long while, their voices sounded like children again, not survivors. The valley was alive again. Sheriff Dunley's men had taken the prisoners to Brimfield County Jail 2 days earlier, and Deputy Cole had promised to personally oversee the case. Evelyn, pale and silent, had been escorted away as well, her expression somewhere between remorse and exhaustion. Daniel didn't hate her anymore. He didn't have the energy for that. Hate had kept him alive for years, but now it felt like a language that no longer fit the world he was trying to build. Walter stepped onto the porch beside him, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. The old man wore his favorite wool coat, patched, faded, and older than both of them combined. His lined face had softened since that night, though his sharp blue eyes hadn't lost their mischief. "You look like a man who's finally exhaled," Walter said, handing him a cup. Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe I did." He took a sip, the warmth sinking deep. "I used to think being a cop meant fixing what was broken. Turns out it's about knowing when to stop fighting ghosts." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "You can't arrest the past, son. You can only outlive it." The door opened behind them. Lila stepped out, her hair still damp from her morning wash, bundled in a knitted green sweater that hung slightly off her shoulders. The silver bracelet caught the sunlight as she lifted her hand to shield her eyes. "Mr. Daniel," she said softly. "Sheriff Dunley's car just came up the road." Daniel turned. The sheriff's truck rumbled to a stop near the fence. The door opened and Sheriff Dunley climbed out, a large man with a barrel chest and gray hair cut close to his scalp. He had a weary kindness about him, the kind that came from years of seeing the worst in people and choosing to believe in them anyway. He wore his brown uniform neatly pressed, though the knees of his trousers bore faint scuffs of dust. "Mornin', Reed," Dunley called, trudging up the path. "Heard you've been busy making half my department look lazy." Daniel shook his hand. "Just trying to stay alive." The sheriff chuckled, then turned his gaze toward the children. "Those two doing all right?" "They're healing," Daniel said quietly. "Slowly." Dunley nodded. "Good. They'll have a hearing next week. County wants to finalize guardianship papers. From what I've seen, it shouldn't be a problem. The court knows what you did." Daniel exhaled, the words hitting him harder than he expected. For the first time, there would be something permanent. Not just temporary custody, not borrowed time, something real. "Thank you," he said simply. Dunley tipped his hat. "Don't thank me. Just keep him safe. You're better at that than most men I know." As the sheriff left, Walter muttered, "Imagine that. Cedar Hollow's most stubborn officer becoming a family man. Never thought I'd live to see it." Daniel smirked. "Neither did I." By afternoon, the sun melted through the last of the frost. Lila sat by the fence with Ranger beside her, brushing the dog's fur with small, gentle strokes. The German shepherd leaned against her leg, sighing contentedly, his bandaged shoulder barely visible beneath his thick coat. "Does it still hurt?" she asked. Ranger's ear twitched, and he nudged her hand with his nose. Daniel watched them from a distance, his heart heavy with something that wasn't pain anymore, just depth, like the ache of a song that had finally found its ending. He thought of Amelia again, of the night he'd lost her to fire and silence, of the years he'd buried himself in duty because it was easier than remembering what love had once felt like. And now, here he was, standing in the same world that had taken her, somehow learning how to live in it again. Walter's voice broke through his thoughts. "She would have liked them, you know." Daniel glanced at him. "Amelia?" The old man nodded. "She was always drawn to light, even when she lived in the dark. Those kids, especially that girl, they're the same." Daniel smiled. "Yeah," he murmured. "She would have loved them." Later that evening, they gathered around the fire pit outside. The snow glowed faintly blue under the moonlight. Walter cooked stew in an iron pot that smelled of thyme and garlic, the scent wrapping around them like memory. Noah sat cross-legged, feeding small sticks into the flames, while Lila hummed softly, tracing shapes into the snow with her finger. Daniel sat across from them, cleaning his service pistol by habit more than necessity. His movements were slow, thoughtful. He wasn't sure who he was becoming, but for the first time, he didn't need to know. Halfway through dinner, headlights appeared in the distance again. A moment later, a familiar figure stepped from a modest pickup truck, Andrew Moore. His appearance was startling in its simplicity. The man was clean-shaven now, wearing a flannel jacket and worn jeans. He carried a paper bag in one hand, an uncertainty in his eyes. Lila's eyes widened. "Dad?" Andrew froze for a heartbeat, then knelt in the snow as she ran to him. He caught her, holding her tight, his breath hitching. "You've grown," he whispered. "I didn't think I'd ever see you smile again." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "Mr. Daniel says we can start over, can we?" Andrew swallowed hard. "If you'll let me try." Daniel stepped forward, giving him a nod. "You clean?" Andrew met his gaze. 6 weeks sober, got a job at the lumber yard in Brimfield. Thought I'd bring something for the kids." He lifted the paper bag. Inside were 2 small carved wooden animals, a fox and a deer, rough but full of care. Noah's face lit up. "Did you make these?" Andrew nodded. "Yeah, your mom used to say I was good with my hands. Guess I forgot that for a while." Walter chuckled. "You men and your forgetting. Happens to the best of us." They all sat together by the fire as the stars brightened above the trees. Lila leaned against Daniel's side, Noah asleep in her lap. Ranger stretched out beside them, paws twitching in dream. The night was quiet except for the crackle of flames and the distant call of an owl. Andrew broke the silence. "I can't undo what I did, Daniel, but if you'll let me, I'd like to be around, to visit, to help, maybe even learn how to be what I should have been from the start." Daniel considered him for a moment. "You don't need my permission to be their father. You just need to show up." Andrew smiled faintly, the kind that comes from a man learning how to breathe again. Then I'll start by coming back tomorrow. When the fire burned low, Walter threw in one last log. Sparks lifted into the air, glowing like a handful of stars before fading into the dark. Daniel leaned back, looking toward the horizon. The sky above Cedar Hollow was clear for the first time in weeks, and beyond the line of trees, the faint lights of the town shimmered like something sacred. He whispered almost to himself, "Find the light." Lila, half asleep beside him, stirred. "That's what Mom used to say." Daniel smiled, his gaze on the stars. "Yeah," he said softly. "She still does." The wind swept across the field, gentle now, carrying warmth instead of warning. Ranger lifted his head once, ears twitching at the sound, then settled again, eyes closing in peace. For the first time, the man, the children, and the dog were not running from the past. They were walking toward the light that waited beyond the snow. In the quiet of Cedar Hollow, we learned that miracles are not always loud or sudden. Sometimes they come softly, in forgiveness, in second chances, in the courage to love again. Just like Daniel, Lila, and little Noah, we all walk through our own storms. But when we choose kindness over anger and faith over fear, God lights our path one step at a time. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us what you believe the real miracle was. And if you believe that God still works wonders through love, faith, and compassion, write amen in the comments. May God bless you and your family with peace, warmth, and light every single day. And don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep spreading stories that remind the world that faith still changes lives.